straight from the streets of New York City. Porkins Policy Radio. Here's Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond. You can find this show here at ochelli.com. Of course, the news station from which the show is broadcast live every Tuesday from 3 to 5. You can also, of course, find all of my work at my website, which is porkinspolicyreview.com. If you are new to the show, there are lots of ways to listen. You can, of course, follow directly through the RSS feed on my website. You can find it all archived on my site as well. And you will find all of these new shows archived on ochelli.com as well. I'm on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, Player FM, Podbean. I think we'll be on Spreaker at some point in the near future through ochelli.com. I'm also on, as far as I know, I'm on Ed Opperman's YouTube channel as well. I'm, of course, on YouTube. You can always subscribe to my channel. And if you do subscribe on YouTube, definitely give a thumbs up on those videos. I know that sounds very lame and a bit, very millennial type of a comment, but it does help. The same goes for iTunes. If you enjoy listening to the podcast on iTunes, then definitely give us a good rating. Give us a 5-star rating. Write a review as well. That's super helpful in terms of getting more hits, getting people interested, and of course, then people will know if they're a little unfamiliar with Porkins Policy Radio. They'll have a wonderful little review from you, the listener. And, of course, if you want to support me, if you want to help out, if you enjoy the work that I do here on the radio show, if you enjoy the other stuff that I cover, then you can always go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond, and you can sign up for as little as $1 a month. And that single solitary dollar, just 100 cents a month, gives you access to the exclusive bonus podcasts, which I put out every month. The recent one, of course, with good friend Chuck Ochelli. We talked about the latest season of Counterpart. That single dollar helps me out immensely. I know I had some, I was sort of griping a little bit about this. This was a couple of months ago, maybe. Or no, maybe it was it might have been a month or so ago. I was complaining about a dip in the Patreon numbers, and I don't want to. I hate complaining about that on the show about money stuff. And I had some longtime listeners and people that have supported me on Patreon for a while, messaging me saying they were sorry that they had changed their their subscription level, and please don't ever apologize. I know I make a big deal about, it's just $1 a month. And realistically, I think everyone, if everybody that listens to the show gave $1, we'd be doing some really big things. But, don't never feel like you have to, stress yourself. The money is tight for everybody. Believe me, I know that. But again, it's just $1. So stress yourself. Anyway, that is it from me. We're doing a live call-in show today, and hopefully we will get some listeners calling in. The call-in number, if you are unfamiliar, is 319-527-5016. When you call in, you'll get a little pre-recorded message, and then basically you'll just be on hold, and once you're put on hold, you'll be able to hear the show, what we're talking about right now, and then just sort of stay tuned and just wait a few minutes, and then Chuck and I will bring you on into the call. That number once again is 319-527-5016. I decided to do a call-in show. In part, and I know this is not like me to complain about a guest, but I had this guest flake on me yet again, seemingly. I don't know. I mean, maybe theoretically, maybe we'll get him in the second hour. I doubt it. I'm getting a little message from Chuck that it'll tell them that they are unmuted when they're on the air. So that's right. You'll actually hear a little pre-recorded voice. It'll say you're unmuted, and then you'll be on the air. And of course, I'll also be telling you, hey, caller, how are you? Tell us, where you're from. But anyway, I wanted to do a bit of I thought I would do a call-in show, in part because I had this guest flake on me again. And at this point, this is regarding the Frank Cali murder and this guy Anthony Comello. At this point, I don't even really kind of care about that story anymore. So I don't know if some people are interested though, and they want to call in, they want to talk about it. By all means, we can talk about it on the air now. But I kind of feel like that. I don't know, the boat has kind of sailed when it comes to that particular story, and I kind of just don't really care anymore. So I thought we would do a call-in show, and I think I'll also be kind of just talking a little bit off the cuff. I mean, I've got some notes, some general ideas. I've got some interesting stories that I wanted to talk about. So maybe we'll kind of we'll do that. We'll have a bit of a dialogue, hopefully an open dialogue, with some callers. I do also have some listener questions that I think we will get to in a little while. And some of these are quite old because I always encourage people to send in questions. And then, of course, I never do those question shows, or I put them off, or I think I'm going to do a show like this, and then I get a guest at the last minute. But we'll get into some of those as well. But I'll just sort of say off the bat right now, I mean, the stories that I have been interested in the past couple of days, a big one is the political situation right now in Sudan. We have longtime leader of Sudan, Omar al Bashir, I believe 30 years as the president of Sudan. He was just recently ousted in in a military coup. I know that the Twitter hashtag is hashtag Sudan uprising, and I know that it's interesting the way the media is kind of I don't even want to really say spinning it, but that's the sort of message that we're being told. This is an uprising, but it is at this point a coup d'état against Omar al Bashir. Now, that's not to say that the people of Sudan aren't the reason for this, and certainly they are. This is something that was on my radar, although I haven't really talked about it much on the show. But I mean, there were ongoing protests across Sudan, certainly in Khartoum, in the capital, for quite some time now, last couple of months. And they were really kind of starting to come to a head where you're talking about, they were shutting down the city, huge, kind of like on the same level that we saw in places like Egypt, Tunisia, the so-called Arab Spring. And I wondered if that's kind of what we were seeing with Sudan. But this for all intents and purposes, and again, I'm not an expert on Sudan, and unfortunately I haven't followed the story as closely as I wanted to, but this did really kind of seem much more like a true kind of grassroots movement. I didn't see like, the usual suspects, the kind of Open Society or the National Endowment for Democracy, any of the traditional color revolution groups. I didn't really see them operating so much in Sudan, and it's interesting that wasn't the case. And I don't know what we can decipher from that, but I didn't see them organizing with various civil society groups. I didn't even really see them making statements. I mean, it kind of, from a very outside perspective, looking at what was happening in Sudan leading up to Omar al Bashir being ousted just a few days ago, it really did seem like these were people that were truly fed up. They were well organized. They had a very simple list of demands, and also some more complex ones as well. I mean, and let's not forget also though that a lot of the kind of day-to-day struggles that people are experiencing in Sudan at the moment right now are the sorts of things that food, the price of food, the price of gasoline, things like that, medicine, and a lot of this does in fact stem from U.S. sanctions. So, we can kind of, I think we'll have to kind of wait and see exactly how that plays out. But it does seem that has contributed on some level to this change of government. But again, I don't know that. I don't see like the West's sort of hand behind this. Now, the interesting thing though is that while there were these large-scale protests, people have probably seen there was this woman who was singing a lot of these protests, and she's kind of become this icon, at least in a lot of the media. And I wonder too, to the extent that it's she's an icon in Sudanese media and within the Sudanese protest movement, or if this is really like a Western sort of propping up. But there was this woman, again in she had on like a loose hijab like they wear in Sudan, and singing, leading in chants and stuff like that, and she sort of became this icon. It was like an easy. But I mean, I saw these stupid articles like BBC talking about the Nubian queen of Khartoum leading the revolution. But anyway, it became such a an issue. The protests became so widespread that the army in fact stepped in and arrested Omar al Bashir. I don't know exactly where he's being held. In the initial days that this was sort of unfolding, I remember seeing lots of different reports and rumors kind of circulating, on Twitter, that he might have, that he was still in the presidential palace in Khartoum, but, he was under guard, that he had been, removed and was being moved to an undisclosed location. I've seen things that say that he is still, he's obviously still in Sudan, but that he's still in Khartoum, but that they moved him maybe, to his former residence or something like that. But at the moment, I'm not really exactly sure where he is, and the military is kind of in control of the situation. The person that has been named as the sort of head of the Transitional Military Council is Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah Abdul Rahim Burhan. You can find lots of articles about him whenever he's been on the media, he's been speaking, he's giving a lot of press conferences about all of this, and supposedly the military is at first. The sort of message that they were putting out there was that they would be in charge for 2 years, and that then after the 2 years there would be some sort of a transition to democratic government. Now it actually seems that the population of Sudan was quite dissatisfied with this, and I think rightfully so, they understood the writing on the wall that this could easily kind of turn into an Egypt-like scenario where, oh, cool, we got rid of Mubarak, but in his place, we just got al-Sisi, who, I mean, seems to be just as bad, maybe even worse than Mubarak was. So they actually wanted to, they did not like this at all, and they were actually able to kind of walk that back. And now it seems that the line from the military is that they are going to let the people decide what is going to happen, the fate of Sudan. So we'll have to kind of see how that plays out. And there's a few more interesting things related to what's the ousting of Bashir and what that means for Africa in general. Before we kind of get to that, we've actually got a caller on the line, so we'll try and connect them right now.
Hey, Pierce, it's Jon Gold.
Hey, John, how are you?
I'm doing well. I was bored. I know you had a call-in show today, so I'm calling in to say hi and to give my 2 cents about whatever you want to talk about.
Well, we were just talking about Sudan at the moment, right now, and the political situation there. We could quickly though, John. We could shift gears a little bit, and just because another thing I wanted to talk about a little bit on the show was, and I'd like to get your kind of your quick perspective on it, is the weird 9/11 never forget rhetoric. I saw this all weekend, and I was just sort of floored that it felt to me like it was September 14th 2001, all of a sudden, with all of this never forget, all of this weird kind of rah 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 America, and much of this directed at Ilhan Omar. So we'll throw it to you, Jon Gold, for your take on that.
Well, first, regarding Sudan, Sudan was listed among Wesley Clark's countries that he heard about days after 9/11. And it's one of my most popular videos, actually, on my channel on YouTube, Gold9472. Wesley Clark was right. And that started under Obama, I believe, what was going on in the Sudan. With regard to never forget, it's very sad to me. It's very sad to me because it's just another in a million instances of 9/11 being used politically in the wrong effing way. Somebody on Twitter said that the patriotic button is being pushed. Be wary of that. And one of my favorite, I call him a mentor, and it's only because I very much appreciated the way he presented information. Dr. Michael Perrine once called what you're referring to as the patriotic binge. And, everybody he used to say his friends would wave the flags, USA, USA. Hey, wait a minute. This isn't feeding the kids. USA, USA. Hey, wait a minute. This isn't, paying the rent kind of thing. This is, there's a video online called something like Conspiracy, Globalism and Terrorism or something, from Dr. Michael Perrine from, I think it was early or mid 2002. I recommend everyone go watch it. I actually used to show that to people before I would even mention 9/11 stuff. Anyway, there's so many things wrong with it. First of all, do you remember it was in 2012, Ahmadinejad from Iran was coming to visit the site, Ground Zero. And the New York Times posted that he's a piece of SH exclamation point T. Do you remember that?
Oh,
so that kind of shows what the New York Post thinks of brown Muslim people who have opinions.
Well, look at the way they've talked to, or treated Ilhan Omar.
It's just disgusting.
Yeah.
I made a video about it. It's just disgusting. She was talking, it was completely blown out of context. But she was right. Some people did something, and we were lied to about 9/11. So could be called a very accurate description of what happened on 9/11. Because we don't know the truth about 9/11, unfortunately.
I honestly did not understand. Finish your thought, John.
Well, I was going to say, some people did something. I've been saying for years that individuals were responsible for the mass murder that took place on 9/11/2001. Not entire countries, not entire religions, ideologies. It was individuals who were responsible and individuals that should be held accountable. And you can teach people that have been taught the wrong way their entire life a new way. You can do these things. You just blame the individuals, okay? Just as she was pointing out, some people did something. That doesn't mean you blame all Muslims, which is where we are now, and something I've been fighting against for years, and it just breaks my heart. Because I read that article, 9/11 was not a Muslim crime. It just breaks my heart. I used to go out with signs, saying 9/11 was not a Muslim crime because of all the hatred that I saw against them. And it was very heartbreaking to me. And so this is just more of it. And do you remember the Ground Zero Mosque?
Oh, yeah, of course. I was sort of thinking about, it reminds me of that kind of like insane rhetoric that's being whipped up. I mean, again, this never forget nonsense. And I mean, I think you probably saw some of my tweets. I mean, Rudy Giuliani lecturing people about 9/11. And I mean, this is a guy that he's made a political career out of it. He literally he's made money off being, America's mayor. And of course, I mean, at the very least was involved in helping some form of the cover-up by destroying all the evidence. Carting away all of the rubble and whatnot and steel. Just a few days, he began, after 9/11 began the process of destroying evidence. So for him to lecture people is bizarre. But the same...
Well, did you see what I just did? I just did this. I spent the afternoon putting together this document, and it's a collection of articles that I collected over the years at the time when Rudy was running for president. And it's a lot of the articles. It's called Rudy Giuliani versus the 9/11 families and firefighters.
Oh, I did see
and they were all... Oh, good.
Yeah.
I just put this document together. If you see me on Twitter, it's available there. If you see me on Facebook, it's available there. And it's a collection of articles showing the 9/11 families, pointing out that Rudy Giuliani was not a hero. He was not America's mayor. He was responsible, for a lot of things that took place on 9/11.
Well, there's the whole issue of the radios with the firefighters. Why
the radios, the removal of evidence, the refusing to fight for the 9/11 Commission. His selection of Bernie Carrick.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, another scumbag. It's interesting too, John. I find this climate too, this sort of like never forget, this extreme kind of patriotism and whatnot, and also this and I don't think this is totally by accident. It coincides a bit with the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, being labeled a terrorist organization. And of course, there's so many people, particularly at like institutions like Long War Journal, that have long tried to link Iran to 9/11. I mean, there's so much. Even this Glenn Beck saying that the Notre Dame fire is their 9/11. I mean, talk about nobody died in the Notre Dame fire. I mean, it's horrible. But it's almost like it's such a tool for disgusting people to push whatever kind of agenda they want to. It's just shocking to me. We also, we've got another caller on the line. So, John, if you want to stick around, you're more than welcome to, or we'll put you on hold.
Well, I have one thing to add.
Sure.
Go ahead.
No.
The thing I wanted to point out, on September 20th, 2007, apparently Bernie Carrick was on Neil Cavuto's Fox's Business, whatever the hell his show is called. And Carrick said about Ahmadinejad, about a visit to the site. He said, quote, "This guy shouldn't be allowed anywhere near there. To me, there's no difference in bringing Ahmadinejad than there is in bringing Osama bin Laden. This is a man who has threatened the United States. He has threatened the Europeans. He's threatened to put 45,000 suicide bombers throughout the world if we oppose his nuclear," end quote. Because Cavuto interrupted and asked the police officers who might be assigned to protect him should do. And Carrick said there will be New York City, quote, "cops who just refuse to go," end quote. He said, quote, "You lost 23 members of my department on 9/11, end quote. Quote, "The Port Authority lost 37 and the fire department lost 343. I can't see any one of those agencies assisting any part of the detail going down there, and it would be really a shame for us, the United States government, to let him down there." And this tied 9/11 to Iran.
Erroneous.
I mean, pointing out what you were just saying.
Yeah, there is no real
I posted
connection.
this today, which is funny. I posted this today because of the Carrick thing and Ilhan Omar, and you just brought it up, so it's funny you did that.
No, yeah, it's again the connection is, and this is something I have discussed this in the past. There does appear that there, and it begs the question that some within Iranian intelligence are obviously aware of Al-Qaeda operatives within Iranian soil, and I'm sure that there was some kind of a tacit agreement, that as long as there are no attacks within the borders of Iran, we might look the other way at times about you moving through Iran, but we're going to keep tabs on you, obviously. But this grand conspiracy theory by people like Tom Jocelyn at the Long War Journal that Iran was deeply involved in the planning of 9/11 is complete BS. And I think that linking the IRGC, defining them as a quote terrorist organization too. I mean, this is it's a part of the Iranian state. It's part of the military. This would be the equivalent of Iran saying that the Pentagon was a terrorist organization, which if they easily could. If we're gonna categorize terrorist organizations as groups, that murder civilians for political means. But
well, there's an article written by 9/11 family member Kristen Brotweiser from, I believe, 2017, October 2017. It's called "Iran and 9/11: Down the Rabbit Hole of Blame," and it's on Huffington Post, and it's an excellent article on the subject of Iran and 9/11. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no.
You want to get someone?
Yeah, no, I just want to say, John, thanks for calling in, for being the first caller on the very first call-in show. And if you want to, stick around, maybe we'll put you on hold for a little bit, and then, but let's bring in our other caller, Chuck. Caller,
hello.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, what's your name? How are you?
Kai. I'm good. I'm from California, living in Connecticut, Hartford.
Okay, do I know you guys? I think, have we emailed before?
I don't know if we've emailed, but we've had some, I think, exchanges on Twitter, I believe.
Oh, okay, that might be what I'm thinking of. Okay, well, it's good to talk to you, good to hear your voice. You have a question, a comment, anything, that we were discussing before?
Yeah, so you were discussing Sudan. I think I actually just read, funnily enough, an article that was on Mint Press News by Whitney Webb, claiming that Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the U.S. sought Bashir's ouster. And I think it's kind of an interesting two-pronged thing that we're looking at, because it's certainly very true that the protests in Sudan are real. I mean, the unemployment rate in Sudan is about 30%. 60% of the population is under 24 years or younger. But also, it's definitely unequivocally true that, I mean, to a certain extent, Saudi Arabia and Israel have sought Bashir's ouster in various extents, especially because China has had serious investment in Sudan. Israel bombed Sudan 3 times. We know the United States bombed Sudan in the late 1990s under the Clinton administration. So I think you have to kind of be aware that while outside powers are certainly sort of trying to exploit the recent protest, and they're trying to sort of have a counter-revolution against the recent protest, they are still definitely legitimate and real. I haven't seen any serious evidence to put forth that, it's like a Western plot or something.
No, I haven't either, and that's actually that's something, Kai, that did strike me about this, was that it and maybe that is partly why we weren't seeing it plastered everywhere until now to an extent, because this was actually truly regular people that decided to fight back. And interestingly enough as well too, I think that Sudan has this image in the West as this brutal, horrible country filled with genocide perpetrators and whatnot. And I think people will be somewhat interested that women played a prominent role in this. There doesn't, you
definitely.
can see in a lot of these pictures, unlike certain scenes from the Arab Spring, whereas men and women side by side. There seemed to
yeah, and it reminds me a lot of actually of Egypt, because I remember around 2005, one of the first protests that didn't really get any news coverage at the time was actually women who were protesting wheat factories and actually rounded up the men in unions and sort of held these giant mass labor protests. And you saw in Egypt in 2011, certainly women were leading parts of the protests. And I think the danger with Sudan right now is that it's undoubtable that Israel and the United States have sought to sort of put in a military government that will be more aligned to them than Bashir was, and sort of exploit the protests. So while the protests are real, there's these definitely dark interests behind it, sort of trying to implement a counter-revolution. And the example of Egypt, shines again, where, after the Muslim Brotherhood came in, which was a party that was more or less aligned with the United States for a long, long period of time, it's unequivocal that Israel and the United States certainly supported al-Sisi coming in and instituting sort of a military junta that is frankly sort of in many ways worse than Mubarak.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, they seem to be, particularly al-Sisi seems to be even more willing to bend over backwards for whatever Western NATO prerogatives or objectives are. I mean, he seems certainly the stranglehold on like Gaza and the Palestinians seems to be worse under al-Sisi. He seems to have no qualms. I mean, at least at times Mubarak would have to go through the sort of the motions. He would have to, at least rhetorically, complain about Israel. And then of course, carry out whatever brutal task that, was asked of him. But al-Sisi seems to have no kind of preconceived, difficulty with doing this. And another interesting thing too, Kai, the with the Sudan stuff, which I think should also be looked at. I'm glad you're bringing this up too. I mean, the kind of these players behind the scenes. I mean, there's also a lot, with like the control of like water in Sudan, and also of course oil. Like in the that's the thing that I'm interested in. Maybe if you have any insights you'd like to talk about, but like the oil, in the Abiyev region in which is a contested between Sudan and South Sudan, that I know is a big one. And also too with in terms of the control of water, we're talking about the Nile that flows from Egypt all the way down eventually to there are tributaries that go all the way to Uganda, where the last great dictator on the continent of Africa, Museveni, lives. I mean, I'm curious to see what's going to happen to him. I mean, he really is like the last one in this club. We just saw Bouteflika in Algeria go down.
Yeah, the FLN. Yep.
Mugabe, of course, in Zimbabwe. And I mean, even not quite on that level, but in terms of the length, but Kabila in Congo. Even he kind of had to go. Although he might have helped Chisaketi. But Kai, any kind of comments on the oil water stuff? Because I think that is going to play a larger role with whatever happens. Because I think Bashir was, I think progress on those fronts was stymied because of his poor standing in the international community. So it'll be interesting if they can kind of put a new face on Sudan post Bashir. Will we, maybe we'll see oil companies jumping in?
Yeah. I think, we know that around 80% of Sudan's oil is in what's now South Sudan.
Mm-hmm.
And the breakaway of South Sudan, while there's definitely more complexities to it, was definitely certainly, to some extent, sponsored by the United States. USAID had tens of millions of dollars in sort of bringing up these uprisings that cut off South Sudan from Sudan. Ever since then, Khartoum has sort of had a rustle and tussle with South Sudan, even while South Sudan is sort of in the midst of that brutal civil war.
Yeah.
I know a little bit less about the politics of the Nile and the water going through. I do know that al-Sisi has actually recently pledged his support for the new military regime that is in Sudan. And I don't take seriously, as I think many of the Sudanese protesters don't and outside analysts don't, the declarations that the new military government is at all serious about bringing a civilian government.
Yeah.
And so I think you're probably going to see maybe a new alliance of authoritarianism to maybe exploit the Nile from al-Sisi in Egypt and then going through and over to Museveni. And we know Museveni is definitely someone who's willing to carry out Western interests in Rwanda and the Congo. And I also think that possibly one of the things that Western powers are going to try to exploit is a lot of the infrastructure, including oil infrastructure in the South Sudan and in Sudan, is actually being built by China. China has had major investments in Sudan, and China, while they're not playing a direct political role, because we know that the CCP has often really not tried to directly intervene in outside politics. Whatever everyone wants to think of Chinese foreign policy, they definitely have an economic and more or less peaceful foreign policy. We're going to try, to see these powers maybe exploit this and cut off the oil and cut off the infrastructure project that China has been building. Because for all the U.S. machinations in Sudan and in South Sudan, they've so far completely failed to put away Chinese investment. They're by far the largest ones that have built the infrastructure in Sudan for decades.
Oh, totally. And we're talking too. There are Chinese mineral companies operating in Sudan. Certainly, the infrastructure like highways, trains, processing plants, things like that. Yeah, certainly big Chinese investment. And I think that's you're spot on there too, Kai. With we shouldn't. We should look with maybe perhaps with a more curious eye, how the protest movement might be exploited in order to, put the kibosh on some of the Chinese foreign policy.
I was looking at the organization, the Sudanese Professionals Organization, that is actually sort of the one that has come out with the statements from the protesters recently. Mm-hmm. And while it is sort of a broad organization, it includes like the Sudanese Communist Party and things like that. Some of the organization, there's one called the Sudanese Tweeters, like the Sudanese for Tweeters, and we know that USAID has put in tens of millions of dollars. I actually just read this in this Whitney Webb article, which I didn't know about, in these protests. So it's this sort of two-pronged, double-edged sword where it's undoubtable that the protests are legitimate and they're organic to a certain extent, but it does seem like some of these groups really kind of have this fake USAID sort of front nature to them. And I was actually reading a statement by the Sudanese Communist Party yesterday that was talking about how they were declaring, and it seems plausible, that some people within the protest movement are essentially maybe trying to form sort of an agreement between the new military government and others. Do you remember when al-Sisi took power in Egypt? A lot of people actually supported it over the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, absolutely. And all those
so I think,
pro-democracy groups. We were meant to, idolize seem to throw their weight behind him. Very interesting point there too, because I don't share this sort of optimistic fervor that many seemingly in Khartoum and Sudan in general seem to have for the military coming in. I mean, I even saw this was I don't know. I can't remember specifically. I'll try and throw up the find the link to. This was like a France 24, of course. Very interested in what happens in Central Africa. They were interviewing a Sudanese activist, very prominent part of, probably the same sort of larger organization you're just describing. And, she seemed in no uncertain terms was stated that she was pretty happy with the coup. That this was that they were cautious. Because they obviously they don't want just another Bashir type figure coming in, but they seem to be looking forward on some level to this happening. And she was like, maybe it'll be good, maybe it'll be bad, but this is just kind of the nature of it. I mean, fairly pragmatic as well. But I think that is exactly what I would, again, a white guy in New York would caution, the Sudanese protesters about, is just those sorts of elements, because I can very easily see, listen, the military is not going to secede power. They're not going to just give up. And also this idea, and this was also, I don't know how or why, but the narrative that formed, particularly in Egypt, that somehow the police were bad. They were really aligned with Mubarak, but the army were the purveyors of democracy and human rights, and that, it was the military that didn't like Mubarak. They all liked him, because they were all suckling on the teat of the state that was Mubarak. And that's the same for the military in Sudan. They may have differences of opinion when it comes to how al Bashir operated, and maybe they want a larger cut of oil and all of the other markets that operate in Sudan. Any military sort of centric government. They're all going to kind of take a piece of whatever they can. But to think that they're going to let the people decide. I don't know. I think that's a little too optimistic. But it's interesting too, the speed that this happened as well. I mean, I mentioned at the beginning, they were protesting for a while, but I mean, it seemed like, it was in a couple of days. I saw it on Twitter, like protests reaching, a breaking point. And then like the next day it was like Omar al Bashir has been arrested by the military. So
strangely enough, it kind of seemed shortly after that image came out of that woman standing up doing the speech.
That
was around like on the 11th or the 10th, and then that got a lot of media coverage, and you saw a lot of particularly people in the West too, and people like on Twitter and things like that, posting that image up and things like that. And then the coup happened, and then Bashir stepped down. People started to sort of declare victory, yada, yada, yada. And then a day after that, it became very, very clear to anyone who was sort of really paying attention that it was just sort of a change in the guard. And I think one of the things that's interesting about Egypt is that for people who are, really worried about how the war on terror rhetoric has sort of created a dehumanization of large swaths of the Muslim world, an excuse for the United States to intervene wherever it wants, to back any military junta, to crush any sort of semblance of democratic uprisings. A lot of the narrative of when al-Sisi took power was the anti-Islamist narrative. I'm the one coming in that's taking away the Muslim Brotherhood. They're fanatical. They want to impose Sharia law, which they did actually kind of want to impose a couple of points Sharia law, but it was the first time for democracy in Egypt's history. And they sort of took that rhetoric and use that, and that's why people support it. I don't see that coming out of Sudan, but I just think you'll just start to see a split where the Sudanese the movement of professionals, quote unquote, has sort of declared that they're going to continue protests and continue sit-ins, but I think you'll see a split of different, kind of weaker or more Western aligned organizations come in and ally with the current regime, while others may protest, and you'll probably just see it sort of squashed and crushed. And certainly Israel and the United States and Egypt will come in and try to sort of clamp down and block Chinese investment, and then sort of clean the slate for a nice new military junta, which they always seem to love.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it is also, I know that, many people might think of Sudan as this kind of sparse desert, with not a lot going on there. And I mean, I guess that is true to an extent. I mean, it is, it is in a desert basically, but geostrategically extremely important. I mean, you've got, Egypt to the north, obviously, South Sudan to the south, where there's tons of oil. But it's also, it's right on the Red Sea. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, trade going in between there. It's near to, other major, Western proxies like Ethiopia. It's on the border with Chad. Libya is over there. I mean, we haven't even gotten to that yet. So it is geostrategically, I think it's important to the West. And very briefly,
certainly
on the water stuff, the Israel's involvement in that is in part to just sort of squeeze other countries when it wants to. So they have imposed various policies to if they're mad at some because again, Israel has a stake in particularly more as you go south towards Uganda, Congo, in the diamond trade. And they've long, exploited that. And a lot of the water rights with and stuff like that has been used to make things worse for countries down there. Maybe when they're not so keen on Egypt, squeeze them up there. So it's another thing to keep in mind. Kai, very quickly though, I just want to thank you for joining us. Any final thoughts?
My final thoughts would be sort of people to watch what's going on in Sudan a little bit. There's a lot of things happening all over the world, but it's important to, it's easy to call out Western machinations and wars and regime change and things like that after they happen. And also for people to at least try to keep an eye on what's happening in Libya. We all know that NATO destroyed that country, but there's little doubt, I think, that Haftar is supported by the United States.
Supported by the CIA in particular.
Yeah, he lived, a couple miles from Langley?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, he's lived in America for decades, until 2011, when he was called up.
Yeah, he moved when the quote-unquote uprising started, So, just encourage people to try to look at things like that a little bit and not just focus on things that are apparent or disasters in U.S. policy after the fact.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Kai, thank you for calling, and I hope you call back in again sometime soon. I'd love to have you back on the show, maybe discuss some more stuff with Africa and Sudan and Libya. But thank you so much for calling in. All right.
Hey, it's JG.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. I had to call in. I'm glad you're doing the live shows now at a Chelly Effect.
Absolutely. This is JG Michael, for those who maybe don't recognize his voice of Parallax Views. JG, how's it going?
Well, I'm doing pretty good, other than the fact that I feel like the entire internet has lost its mind between this whole Notre Dame fire and then all this stuff with Assange. The amount of moral indignation is just blowing my mind at this point, especially with the fire. No one got hurt in it. It was only, I think, the cathedral, a spire, and everyone is acting, really strange about it, in my view. I don't know what your take is.
No, it's interesting. Yeah, I was shocked at some of the images. I mean, I think any large scale, a big fire is this shocking, disturbing thing. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. It was a couple of years ago. There was a huge gas explosion fire right where I work in the Lower East Side, and I mean it was I don't know. I don't want to say like awe-inspiring, but you are like captivated by it. You are, it's crazy, and I think that that's kind of what was happening with the Notre Dame thing. But I was also like, I don't know. I mean, this sounds very flippant, but yeah, I was like, nobody died.
What's so weird about it is you have all these people saying on social media. They're complaining about the people who are making fun of the fire, and I still can't find anyone who's making fun of it.
Yeah, I don't know. The only people I don't know who's making fun of it. It's what's disturbing is the amount of people that are pushing that this is some kind of a secret Muslim operation. Like, have you seen these? I saw someone tweeting all these photos of like the Arab-looking guys. I mean, but who really knows? They could be, they could be from Sicily or something, for all I know. Smiling, and oh, look, what's going on here? It's just, come on, really?
Right. Well, yeah, I knew the alt-right was already in clockwork motion right after the incident. So,
And I mean, have you seen like Glenn Beck's? We were talking about it a little bit before. I mean, the Glenn Beck's. This is France's 9/11. I mean, talk about like
that's ridiculous.
I mean, again, talk about exploiting people's trauma. I mean, 3,000 people dead in 9/11. Not to mention the probably tens of thousands of people that are dying because of the airborne sicknesses and things like that. Versus, I mean, a cathedral on fire where nobody died, and no real evidence. Mm-hmm. I mean, Beck's whole, if this is Muslims, we're never going to find out about it, which is such a weird comment, and it's such a like easy, kind of get out of jail free racist, card to play, because it's like, yeah, of course that we're never going to hear, because it's not even true. But when you set it up in that, you frame the discussion like that, you can kind of just say whatever the hell you want. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's like one of those things like people, not quite on the same level, but to kind of link it all together. It's like when the Taliban blew up those Buddhist statues, like in the late 90s. I think that like. It disturbed people. It's like I think it's too that kind of the idea of like either burning down this like it is a religious institution. It's a house of God. That I think is also kind of the same way like blowing up the Buddhist statues or anything. You shoot up a mosque or something. It's like, whoa, that's kind of like on another level. Not to equate all of that with Notre Dame. I don't understand it. And it is like one of those things,
when I first heard about it, I thought the whole place burned down. There were people in there.
Yeah, me too. I know.
Apparently not. And I mean, even a priest came out and said the artifacts are all safe too.
Yes. I know. And I don't know if this is true, but I remember kind of seeing it in the Twitter flurry, that, this might have actually been like an accident, like because of all the shoddy construction that they were doing around the spire, and then just of course people kind of politicizing that as well, and the French government. But yeah, I just it's weird to me that people are taking it to such a weird level of like vitriolic, they're so upset. They're using it as this like political hot button issue and everything. They're saying it's 9/11.
Well, I was going to say a lot of leftists are saying it's a monument to the workers. I feel like all sides are trying to exploit this for political gain,
it's so
for their own
weird.
Moral identity.
Yeah, I know. That's what I mean. It seems like everybody is kind of able to like take a piece off of the Notre Dame Cathedral and spin it however the hell they want to. And again, too, when we're talking about, there's a political crisis in Sudan, there's another civil war about to break out in Libya, there's fighting once again in Idlib. ISIS has been defeated, but now there's all these other, various entities that are trying to fill the void in the former stronghold of Al Qaeda and ISIS, Idlib. And yet, I don't know. I mean, like Shepard Smith, bless his soul, probably the only decent person left on Fox News. He's got to, take time out of his show to go after people who suggest that it was some sort of Muslim false flag. I just
right.
I don't understand it at all. JG,
I mean, for me, it's
no. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was just going to say, for me, I was just covering the 9/11 deadly dust with Jenna working on my show, and I'm thinking, no one covers this stuff. And I mean, we have the Victims Compensation Fund. People are trying to get it renewed, but you don't hear about that in the news. But this, where no one has even died, I'm blown away.
Yeah, I know that's what I mean. Where no one died, and yet there's still there are people out there equating it to 9/11. When as you say, I mean, there are people still dying from the toxic dust. It's I mean, I think it just sort of it's very illustrative of how far we've fallen as a society when that's what news is. That's what reporting has become. We're getting up towards the end of the first hour here. JG, if you want to maybe stick around and chat a little bit more in the second hour, you are more than welcome to. I'm so glad that people have been calling in. It's been fantastic, especially when you don't have a show prepared. It's great to have some people. So thank you to John and Kai for calling in earlier, for JG for calling in now. We'll continue that conversation a little bit in the second hour. And very briefly, if you want to call in, if you want to ask a question, leave a comment, if you want to complain about something I've said in the past, you can call into 319-527-5016. So call in. You'll be put on hold, but you'll be able to hear the conversation, and we'll bring you in momentarily. But I guess until then, just stay tuned. We'll be back in a few minutes after these commercial breaks.
Straight out of the subway in New York City. Yeah, baby. The radio show that never sleeps. Porkins Policy Radio with Pierce Redmond.
WallStreetWindow.com. Gold, silver, the stock market. WallStreetWindow.com. The brilliant author of The War State brings you exclusive reports about the big changes upcoming in the markets. WallStreetWindow.com.
Perhaps you're invested deeply.
Perhaps you're not in deep enough. Maybe you're thinking about getting started. WallStreetWindow.com. Michael Swanson, the brilliant author of The War State, understood these trends professionally for many years, and now he gives you the benefit of his knowledge. WallStreetWindow.com. Go there now. Go there now. Go there now. Go there now.
Now back to the man, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are joining us here in the second hour, we are doing our very first call-in show. And we've had some great people calling in. I'm so appreciative. It's great to hear good friend Jon Gold calling in. Also Kai, who I've known through Twitter. We've talked before. It was great to have him. He's quite knowledgeable about Sudan and what's going on in Africa. So I'd love to have him back on. Maybe we'll have him back on the regular show just to chat a little bit. And we are also joined by JG Michael, of course, of Parallax Views. We have him on the line. He called in as well, and we wanted to, JG wanted to stick around a little bit so we could talk a bit about Julian Assange, who of course is very much in the news. As I am talking right now, I just was watching the recent security footage that was released. It looks like it was released to Fox News. That was the first outlet I saw that had it, of Julian Assange inside the Ecuadorian embassy skateboarding. I mean, that's kind of an exaggeration. He had a skateboard in, I guess, the room that he lived in, and he was just sort of moving back and forth on it. JG, have you seen the security footage of Julian Assange inside the Ecuadorian embassy?
Oh, yeah, he looks like old man Winter now.
Yes, he does.
Well, I mean, my thing with this whole Assange thing is you can't satisfy anyone when it comes to this story. I'm kind of annoyed because honestly, I think Assange is a merc. He's a mercenary figure. But the journalists that are going after him now, the media establishment, they're really no better. And I'm just surprised that if you say that there are no good guys in this, people flip out immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. No. I and to be totally honest, I just think he's a creep. I think he's very opportunistic. I don't think he really cares too much in terms of the politics. I don't think that really factors into him. And in a way, I think, that's good. He's sort of an equal opportunity. If it's a right winger leaking something bad about the left wingers, that's fine. And vice versa, whatever, however you want to categorize it. I mean, he's certainly gone after American foreign policy, but he also leaked lots of stuff about about Bashar al-Assad. He's leaked across the board. I think he is an equal opportunity leaker in that sense. But I think he's kind of a shady character. I don't think he has really any actual allegiance to anybody. I mean, just by the mere fact that he cozied up, to Trump. Now, whether it was, there was like a real kind of, go-between with that. But I mean, he did seem to, with Donald Trump Jr., I mean, he was willing to release, Trump's tax records in order to deflect from questions about that, or basically just to attack Hillary Clinton. I think he hated Clinton so much, he was willing to kind of throw his hat in with Donald Trump, who obviously could care less about Julian Assange. When push comes to shove. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen these edited videos of, WikiLeaks, how many times Trump said WikiLeaks and liked Assange, for the Podesta emails. But, I'm shocked. I'd love to get your take, JG. I mean, all of these like alt-right, alt-light idiots who are like just shocked to find out that Donald Trump isn't fighting the deep state and is willing to, extradite Julian Assange. I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, Donald Trump is like a bad version of a mob boss in a 40s crime boiler, So I'm not sure why they're surprised, but I mean, whatever gets them off, I guess. I almost feel like these alt-right kids think this is all a game.
Yeah, I know exactly. I get that same feeling as well, that this is just sort of like a joke to them, or that it isn't, because that's the thing. I think that yes, this is certainly a blow to democracy and freedom of speech and journalism in general. And I think that, you should be allowed to rightfully point out that Assange is a creep, not a very moral person. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting how, I don't know, a lot of these alt-right figures that are constantly, harping on about, the immorality of the Democratic Party and using the Me Too movement as this sort of political weapon, but they refuse to even entertain some of the allegations about Assange. While at the same time, I think that, could he have been set up? Sure. I mean, at that point in time, I think they were willing to do anything. But to just sort of ignore it, because again, it makes him look tainted. That's what's so interesting is how...
all these right-wingers say that they're dropping the charges against him when it comes to the rape allegations. That's not what happened. The investigations were stopped because they can't get to him.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right, entirely. And also just I mean, I don't know. This is maybe very shallow or whatnot, but I mean, you just look at some of the people like coming in to visit him. I mean, Cassandra Fairbanks, Pamela Anderson. I mean,
Pamela Anderson.
It's a pretty sleazy group. I mean, like what? Why are they there? How'd they even get access to that? That's strange. And on some level too, he probably is like the worst house guest you could possibly have, and he's been there for 7 years. I mean, that's got to be difficult. And I find it really kind of disgusting. I heard this like from John Kiriakou on Loud and Clear, and I like Loud and Clear. I listen to it every day. I think it's a great, if you only listen to like 2 hours of news, it's really good. But hearing this sort of like praise being heaped on this guy, and talking about how he's been in solitary confinement, within the embassy. Get out of here. I mean, number one, he can move around the embassy. Okay, he's not in lockdown. Do people in solitary confinement get Pamela Anderson coming to visit them? Do they get access to their lawyers? Do they get Cassandra Fairbanks and other media figures coming in? No, absolutely not. I mean, it's I don't know. There's some, of course. So it's interesting too. I mean, Ecuador gets this big IMF loan. It seems to be timed with this. I know, JG, you had Barrett Brown on your show not that long ago. I mean,
I have not had Barrett on yet. He is coming on very soon to talk about this.
Oh, okay. But I know he has...
That's actually what I wanted to mention. I was going to say, my problem with Assange, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. Thank you for being a gracious host. The thing with Assange is early on, there were people involved with WikiLeaks who were doing the same work as WikiLeaks. People like John Young of Krypton.
Yep.
Krypton was doing the same stuff as WikiLeaks. And the difference between John Young and Assange is that Assange used WikiLeaks to become a media rock star. Assange only cares about his own narcissistic self-image and being, some media rock star guy. John Young never did that. Barrett Brown, who was involved with WikiLeaks, also left WikiLeaks because of Assange's multiple, he throws people under the bus.
Yep.
And he doesn't seem to care about anything other than Julian Assange. And, everyone who has done good work with WikiLeaks has pretty much left. They're now with Barrett Brown's Pursuance Project. I mean, I think WikiLeaks without Assange would probably be better off.
Yeah. Oh, and you can tell too, like when Assange didn't have access to the to the WikiLeaks Twitter account, they were saying some different things. Like I know, I've mentioned this many times because it was cool when it happened, but the official WikiLeaks Twitter account tweeted out the journal article that I was in, and Tom Secker, Aaron Franz, Tarzi, we all helped contribute to. I don't think could have cared less about that, and and they were tweeting.
Well, they tweeted stuff about spirit cooking in Pizzagate.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
That WikiLeaks Twitter is weird.
Yeah, exactly. And then that was always our question was like, who's actually controlling this? You know, I mean, is this like? And I could picture them like Assange getting access, and then them. But yeah, I think that you're spot on. The John Young Cryptome thing is still every day putting up, classified documents, leaked, reports, memos, all the stuff that WikiLeaks does. John Young at Cryptome has been doing for, longer, and he still does. And they don't seem to be going after him. I think in part, like you say, because he's not this like media whore that needs to be the center of it.
It's not about him. He's always stayed in the background and let the information speak for itself.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, right. And some of the stuff that Cryptome puts up is like, maybe it's not real. Maybe it is. But it's kind of up to us to decipher it, to look into it, to explore this, come to our own conclusions. Unlike, Assange, who I think very much loves being on camera. Remember when he had a show on RT? It's like, he loves the spotlight. I think you're right. And I think that,
he loves being with Tommy Lee's ex, Pamela Anderson.
Right. The whole, and that's what I remember. My sister and I were talking about this when he got arrested. That we were like, it sucks feeling obligated to like defend such an awful human being. And I do find myself doing that at times because, like, I don't buy this, like, that he was smearing, feces on the walls. I mean, come on. Really? It just, that doesn't really add up to me.
I don't care if he was. I mean, this is an issue of what is going to be done to journalists and publishers because, first and foremost, he was a publisher of information. And that's all getting thrown under the rug. And the precedent this sets is very bad. I mean, Barrett Brown was saying on RT recently he's fed up with all the journalists who are attacking Assange. And Barrett Brown is no friend of Julian Assange. The precedent that is being set and the fact that media journalists only care about their bottom line and, being part of the DC establishment machine, journalism in a lot of ways, I kind of wonder if it's dead in the water.
Or certainly I think journalism, adversarial journalism, is dead in the water, or it's dying. I don't know if it's quite dead, because yes, I think the New York Times, the Post, LA Times, all of the mainstream TV outlets, all of these news outlets that use WikiLeaks materials on a daily basis. I think you would really truly be hard pressed. I mean, you could pick any newspaper in this country on any day, and there's probably some, report in there that is attributed to information, gleaned from WikiLeaks. I mean, that's how much they rely on what he did. And yeah, for them to all completely turn their backs on him, because, and I think it's in part, I mean, they're turning their backs on him because he is such a divisive figure. But, they can't separate Assange from this organization. And that's partly his own fault because he is so he's linked himself. He is WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks is him. And he instills this cult-like devotion from so many people that I don't know. But again, I do wonder. I mean, it seems more and more like even that his followers are missing a lot of what's really happening here. But yeah, I think you're totally right. And I saw Barrett Brown on RT, probably the same interview. Just sort of hounding all these people that are making money off of him, through these leaks, and now they're all just suddenly they could care less. Yeah, it's a dark day for journalism. And especially too. I mean,
the only thing I would add. The only thing I would add to that is the reason I say journalism is dead in the water, or it feels that way at times, is really mainly because, journalism is so driven by the almighty dollar at this point, and what sells is not going to be real stories. It's not going to be, renew the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund. It's going to be, listicles on BuzzFeed or, Russiagate, the most sensational aspects of Russiagate at that. That's what sells. The soap opera sells now. And I think that's why the media doesn't care about freedom of the press anymore. Because, they're just going to go with whatever really, gets the ratings. I mean, I think it was the guy at ABC News, the head of it, said Trump may not be good for the country, but he's good for ratings.
Remember when the WikiLeaks dumps came out? What was it? What was it that everybody reported on? It was all of the gossipy emails from the State Department to the various embassies. Nobody likes Hillary Clinton, and this person is an idiot, and blah blah blah. I mean, it wasn't. There is like real information. I mean, I remember at the time going through them, and the one that always got me was that in these cables, you could basically clearly connect the dots on U.S. intelligence helping to overthrow a somewhat left-leaning leader in Paraguay in order to put back in place this sort of like white racist, oligarchy, in Paraguay. And that was all in the WikiLeaks stuff. I mean, you could really, pinpoint on this date this happened and blah, blah, blah. Who cared about that? It was much more what kind of dress did, Hillary Clinton wear to some sort of function on how everyone, dislikes this particular ambassador and the gossipy stuff. Again, the sensational material, not what's really kind of in there.
Well, it's what Pamela Anderson is tweeting about Britain right now, to say let him out of the embassy.
Yeah, I know exactly.
That's what people are looking at.
Yeah, and in her tweet, why'd you do this equator instead of Ecuador?
Right.
We've got another caller on the line, so let's bring them on. JG, if you want to stick around, maybe we can all chat, or you're more than welcome to jump off the call.
Could I just real quick? I just wanted to plug the latest show I did, if I could, real quick.
Please, yeah, go ahead.
So we were talking about Pamela Anderson. This may not interest your listeners, but I just had Bobby Jean Brown on my show. I released the episode today. Bobby Jean Brown is known as the Cherry Pie Girl from the Warrant music video, Cherry Pie. She's my cherry pie. So it's a bit of a gossipy episode, but it's interesting to anyone that was into the glam metal scene back then. And it's actually a pretty interesting story she has to tell. So maybe your listeners would like it more than I would think.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, I know I would like it. And I think a lot of our the listeners out there, are into some of the gossipy stuff. I mean, I talk about that kind of stuff on the show too. Definitely, yeah. I encourage people to check out Parallax Views. That is JG Michael's show. I'm sure we'll be recording something in the very near future. So JG, thanks for calling in.
Yep, no problem, man.
And Chuck, we've got another caller on the line, so why don't you bring them in as well?
Actually, you missed my message. They dropped.
Oh,
Sorry.
Okay. They've dropped. All right. Well, if anyone wants to, I know we were kind of chatting there for a while, so we might have missed. If you feel like you're going to call in and not get on the air, you will get on the air. I promise you that. And the number once again is 319-527-5016. That is the call-in number. If you call in, you'll hear a little message, and and then we'll bring you right onto the call. So you'll be on hold momentarily, but you'll be able to hear whatever we're talking about. So great. I mean, thus far, very good on the calls. I'm very excited. I'm very pleased that people do. I think maybe in the future I'll try and kind of like. Do my best to sort of hype that up or whatever, get more people interested. And maybe we'll do, quicker calls, but it is nice to have someone on and, give them a little bit of space to, talk about their opinions or what have you. So once again, that number, if you want to call in, if you want to ask me a question, leave a comment, if you want to complain about something I've said in the past or something you don't like about me, the number is 319-527-5016. So please call in. yeah, so lots of interesting stuff. The Assange thing, just one quickly, and then I'll kind of leave it. I think I'll probably at some point, I'll be covering the Julian Assange saga in more detail. I mean, particularly too as we hear more information. What's going to happen? Is he going to be extradited? But important to keep in mind when it comes to this that they're doing some very clever legal maneuvering, and this is like on behalf of the U.S. and the United Kingdom when it comes to all of this, because the UK, Assange is wanted in America, on these espionage charges. These are capital offenses. I don't believe it's legal for the United Kingdom to ever extradite someone to another country where they could face the death penalty. And indeed, that is one possibility. I don't think they're gonna. I don't think that they would ever charge Assange with or execute him. I mean, that would be pretty insane. But certainly that's on the table. So I don't think that the UK legally is allowed to extradite someone to a country where that could be a possibility. So they're using some interesting, they're going for a lesser charge right now. It's not the big ones that they're going to extradite him on. And I think that's key, when you have this kind of discussion with people, especially if they're kind of, attacking Assange or whatever. And again, I dislike him immensely. That's important to keep in mind. They're going after him too on this basically this hacking charge. They're accusing, and this has got to be why Chelsea Manning is back in prison again at the moment. She refused to testify in some hearing or whatever against Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. I believe this is related to what's going on now. This happened just a little while before news of Ecuador, expelling him from the embassy. But they're going to go after Assange right now for helping to aid Chelsea Manning in hacking. Not hacking necessarily, but she had these, when she got all these various documents and whatnot from the Pentagon, some of them had these encrypted passwords. And I forget the legal or the hacker terms and stuff, but I think it's called a rainbow sheet, which is basically it could be millions of different combinations of passwords and whatever that hackers will use in order to, basically they can kind of decrypt things and get passwords. Anyway, Assange said that he had these. He offered to help her to get the password to some sort of encrypted files. It never actually happened. I don't know if I believe he never actually went through this, or he never received anything, but it was just the offer. So just that offer alone, they're hounding him on that. Because they can use this as it's the way that the anti-hacking laws and the legislation, you can basically they're very open-ended, and I think that's sort of by design. But you can get people on these silly little things like that, and you can the way that these laws were created. You can send them away to prison for the rest of their lives. It's very easy. It's also it's a complicated topic for a lot of people. So you can kind of convince a grand jury or whatever to convict, to indict somebody very easily. I think with a lot of these hacking laws, they don't really quite understand it. If you can explain it in such a way, you can kind of get them to vote, or not vote, but to go with whatever kind of particular opinion that you want. So they're going after him on that. But the big thing there, too, is that this allows for all of these journalists out there, these upstanding, fine journalists who have never done anything wrong, ethically speaking, in their entire lives. They can say, oh, you see, he's not a journalist. He's a hacker. So let's lock him up, or let's, execute him for committing espionage and all. And nothing, no one's died that we know of because of this. If anything, they have exposed murders, like the collateral murder video of American soldiers shooting 2 Reuters journalists in Iraq. I mean, remember, that was one of the big moments. That was one of the sort of catalyzing things that Chelsea Manning leaked to WikiLeaks, the collateral murder video. They're literally killing journalists. They knew these weren't terrorists or anything. That it's just nowhere in the media discussion. While they're trying to extradite this guy back to America, where he will not face a fair trial. He's going to go to I think it's the Eastern District of Virginia, which is, it's like this well-known district basically for trying espionage, whistleblower cases. I mean, there's one judge there in particular. I can't remember her name. I'll try and find some stuff. We'll link up to it in the show notes if I can. She sort of reserves the right to go after all, sorts of whistleblower espionage cases. She went after John Kiriakou, Jeffrey Sterling, another CIA whistleblower, lots and lots of people. She, uses all of her legal power in air quotes, to basically ensure that the government will get the type of verdict and outcome that they want to. She's very broad powers to classify tons of material, to not allow certain things in, to change the wording. There's this weird practice where if if the judge deems that this is too much of a important case, that it would blow espionage activity, it would endanger intelligence networks, all that kind of stuff, they can change the wording. So you couldn't use like NSA, CIA, FBI. They would change all of those they would just make up names. So it would be, instead of CIA, you would say Pegasus or Apollo or something like that. Confuses the jurors. They don't know, what the true scope is of what they're actually being told. When you start classifying and changing the names of so many different things, they begin to believe that, oh my God, I mean, if they're classifying all of this, I mean, what was this guy involved in? When they could really be classifying very benign terms, or they could be classifying the same term in different ways. They could be using a different name to describe one particular organization or institution. So, he's screwed if he comes to America. I mean, that's the bottom line. I don't think he's going to get out of this one. And Donald Trump is not going to pardon him. Nobody is going to help this guy, in a political way. I don't believe that they could anyway. I mean, they can make a stink about it. They can try and use it. I'd be very interested to see, as we get closer to 2020, if Assange is extradited to America. It'll be interesting to see, if some of the, these wonderful progressive heroes like the neoconservative Tulsi Gabbard continues to support Assange. I'd be interested to see that. I think that might be something of a litmus test to see, how politically viable supporting this guy is. But yeah, just to reiterate, I mean, it is dangerous. This is not entirely dissimilar. A couple weeks ago, Ed Opperman and I were talking about the Alex Jones deposition. And it is easy to go after a figure like Alex Jones. He is so reprehensible. He is such a sleazy grifter, makes money off people. I mean, talk about cashing in on 9/11. I mean, he's, for all of his, we got dropped from all these stations when we talk about 9/11. It doesn't matter. He makes that up tenfold, selling supplements and all that other crap. And he gets people interested. That's kind of BS. But it's easy to go after someone like Alex Jones because he's so bad. But you do have to wonder. I mean, that's the first step, towards something. And I think it's similar to an extent with Julian Assange. He's not a nice person. He is, as I said, a media whore. He wants to be the center of this story, not so much what's in the material, on WikiLeaks. He's alienated almost all of the original members of WikiLeaks. Have either left because of him, like Barrett Brown has talked about this before. I think there's an interview he did on with Eric Draitser on Counterpunch Radio. This was a while back, and to my knowledge, I think it's one of the first interviews Barrett Brown gave, kind of talking about this whole topic. So definitely check that out, or of course, just wait for J.G. Michael, his interview. Maybe we'll try to get Barrett Brown on the show. But he has alienated so many of his original followers and stuff. He has become so this cult of personality. You look at the people that now kind of surround him. I mean, they're all of these like I said, these alt-right figures, also these kind of like phony progressive characters. I don't quite know what to make of, when I see like some of these, like I saw like a picture, I don't know if it was on someone's Twitter account, but it was like Medea Benjamin and Cassandra Fairbanks side by side. I don't know. I don't really, that's not my idea of like a broad coalition, I don't know.
Strange bedfellows, Pierce. You're apparently not seeing my messages, so I'm just going to give you two verbal notes. One, JG is still on hold, and two, you have a new caller from a number which is unidentified that are waiting. So I don't think you saw my text.
I did not see those, Chuck. Well, bring on the new caller. Caller, how are you? What's your name?
Hello. Hi, Pierce. I'm Thor. I'm calling in from Switzerland today.
How are you? We definitely know each other, right?
Do we?
I think so.
We exchanged on Twitter a few times.
On Twitter, yeah, and Patreon as well. Am I mixing that up? Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't been active on Patreon. I never got it set up on my on my phone.
Well,
I'll message you after that. I'm gonna.
Well, how are you? What's you have a comment, a question, something on your mind you want to talk about?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really like the content you've done based on work in Africa. I really liked your conversation earlier on Sudan, and your podcast from a long time ago on Libya with, I can't remember the person's name.
I think that was Eric Draitser from who now works for Counterpunch.
Eric Draitser. Yeah, exactly. And just I think I hope you can keep covering that. Also because I think there's a lot of big things that are going to be happening in the larger sort of North Africa, West Africa, Central Africa region there. I work closely with the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, and they're closing their entire Latin America division in the next year or two, and scaling back radically in Asia, committing the entire budget to Africa, because they're desperate to prevent migration, of course. So, you're seeing big European investment funds, coordinating with some of these government agencies. So there's going to be a lot of deals going on. I think even an increase, and especially from the Europeans. And I think something interesting with the Sudan is now that allows, Syngenta Foundation to come in there working with an actor like Ag Fund, the Arab Gulf Fund for Development, to sort of test the waters, regardless of whether you have a military dictatorship or, some form of democracy or whatever it is. These guys are now in, So I think we need to keep an eye on it.
No, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. It's interesting you're saying that the agency you work for is sort of just, they're completely refocusing to Africa, and I think that it's funny. I've said this before on the show. I know Chuck has said this many times on the show. About the focus that many, in the West have, like militarily speaking in Africa, AFRICOM, that Africa is going to be this like new kind of battleground. I mean, it always sort of has been, but I think in maybe perhaps a more overt way. And, it's one of those things where it's I think people, analysts, geopolitical analysts and stuff like that, they love talking about it, and it's interesting and stuff, but I think we're really kind of seeing it now. And it's interesting that, people have long talked about, oh, this is the new, this will be the fight between, China and the U.S. will be in Africa. But then when we actually kind of see it unfolding, suddenly they're looking elsewhere. They're focused on other places. Whereas, I think, as we were talking about before, I mean, with Sudan, such heavy Chinese investment there. And not just, Sudan. I mean, we're talking about lots of places in West Africa, East Africa, Central Africa. China has had, long been, interested in developing all those places. So it's interesting, though, that when it is actually begins to kind of unfold, we're not, we're kind of looking the other way. Anything else, related to, Africa, Sudan, anything else we've been talking about you want to mention?
Well, I just want to add to that and say, as soon as the money starts to be made, right? As soon as the investments start to be made, as soon as, the returns start flowing back to either Europe or the U.S. And I think that's part of why this works out so well, because, these European investment funds, they've had enough of not being able to invest in some of these areas and watching it float away to China. It really can't just be viewed geopolitically. Like you said, there's a lot going on. And so, especially these responsible finance, sustainable finance funds, we're talking billions of dollars, right? And all of it is private. There's not even a semblance of sort of public oversight, but they're operating sort of in tandem with the development agencies. And I'm kind of right in the middle of that. It's a strange sort of gray zone where there's not an enormous amount of oversight. Everything's confidential.
Right.
There's no obligation to release it. So how can you really do journalism? How long does it take to do a story on something like that? So
actually, I have a quick question for you. Maybe you might have a little insight into it, because it always it's what you're talking about there. I mean, it's all this kind of private money, private corporations, private entities kind of working, and maybe you might know. I mean, like, what do you think of like the sort of like microloan stuff? Because I know that for so long that was kind of this, it's so wonderful. This is how you get people out of poverty and whatnot. But I've seen more and more, articles critical of a lot of that microloan stuff, and that it's not really helping anybody, except for it's benefiting a lot of these big banks that go in there to do this micro credit, microfinancing. Any kind of thoughts on that, Tor?
So the microfinance sector, it sort of really took off in the 90s, right? And peaked in the early 2000s. In between 2007 2010ish, there was a huge crash because people couldn't afford to pay for the loans they'd taken out. Obviously, incomes aren't really rising fast enough. In places around the world, the extraction in the poor countries is just too much. I think it's not sustainable. You can't just loan people money. You have to grow their incomes. And, the idea is basically that you're going to have sort of a micro entrepreneur that's going to take $100 and sell some tuna,
right?
And then borrow $200 and then sell 10 tunas. How often can that happen? I was at a presentation just last year where the guys are honestly talking about, making the next Bill Gates of Indonesia.
Right.
And, what about all the other billion people? Or, 400, 300 million, I guess. And another interesting thing about that, actually, on Indonesia, just to say is, I saw the Indonesian central banker at the Syngenta Foundation conference last year. So these people are mingling, they're helping to decide policy. I know that, for example, in Myanmar, after the dictatorship fell, Syngenta Foundation was one of the ones that moved in, and And one of the people involved bragged that, she knows the central banker and, on a personal level. And so these are the people that are deciding, the regulations for the loan. And so when you have, Symbiotics, a $7 billion fund, in a closed room with the central banker in Zurich, how good can the loans be?
Right.
If the regulation is decided that.
Yeah, no. I mean, and that I think that just sort of raises a larger question of how much this sort of private industry, private organizations are involved in all this. And yeah, I mean, it's I don't know. I don't think it bodes well for the developing world. I know that's sort of that term is not I don't know. I mean, it's not quite PC anymore. But I don't think it bodes very well. And the microfinancing thing, it just, like you said, I mean, I don't know how that's really meant to last. And I guess in a way, it's kind of good that it's sort of disappeared. But yeah, it was just one of those things that always kind of struck me as very bizarre. Any kind of final thoughts? Anything you want to leave the listeners with? I'm glad you called in.
No, just love your show. Thanks for the conversation.
Absolutely, and thank you for calling in, Tor. I'll definitely be covering more stuff to do with Africa. I've got a Libya show in the works. I want to definitely talk about some of that stuff, but I think Sudan too, because there's also, of course, the interesting. I know a bit lately. I've just been talking quite a bit about 9/11 stuff, and it's just constantly keeps popping up in the news. But there is, of course, the connection between bin Laden and Sudan, and he, of course, was staying there. He was under protection of the Sudanese government for a long time, and there's a whole kind of hidden history with all of that. But once again, if you want to call in, if you want to chat, you want to tell me a little bit about yourself, if you want to complain, if you want to ask a question, the call-in number is 319-527-5016. If you do call in, Chuck might need to let me know and just pop on. I don't know why I was not receiving messages related to that, but no worries. Of course, Chuck is always a welcomed voice on the radio show. I guess I do have I know there were some I had some listener questions. Actually, a very dear listener of mine, someone that has been with me since the very beginning, friend of the show, Curtis, who I know I've probably mentioned him many times on the show before. He's been listening basically since I think episode 1, and supported me, financially, donations and Patreon, PayPal, all that kind of stuff. Curtis actually sent me a little email. He couldn't, he wasn't sure if he was going to make it, to call in live. But I will read the email, and he has some questions in here as well. Maybe we'll kind of we'll finish up on that. But this is from Curtis. He writes, "I really enjoyed the Vox Lux review by you and Emma. Very glad that you enjoyed it, Curtis. I liked that was a great episode, I thought. And it's funny, I forgot to tag it on YouTube. That's why the numbers were so low. But I did. I put all the tags in. Anyway, the shows have been great as always, and I dig the new tune. Chuck did good with the voiceover, but I love the old coming to you live from New York City with your host. I miss that too. We debated that, Curtis, Chuck and I. I kind of, I wanted to sort of switch it up a little bit. Maybe we might, we can always record another one if Chuck is up for it. I didn't like the live from New York City because I kept thinking that it just reminded me of Saturday Night Live. And I just can't stand them, so I wanted to switch that. But maybe we'll record an alternate take. Anyway, continuing Curtis's email. Anyway, very excited about Ocelli.com and all my favorite guys with their own network. So am I. I won't be able to call in, so I thought I'd send a couple questions. So this is the first question from Curtis. If there's any way to not get too specific, could you mention what kind of line of work you are in and what your day-to-day research and prep for the show is like? So, yeah, I don't want to get, too specific about where I work. Although, intrepid listeners have been able to decipher where, in fact, I do work. But, I can mention that, I work in the arts, mainly in experimental theater, and also dance, puppetry, performance art. So I work in that world, not as a performer or anything like that. Much more as like I guess not an administrator, but I work more in the kind of like front of house department, you could say, when it comes to that. But yeah, I work in the arts mainly, and in terms of my day-to-day research and prep for the shows, here's a little secret. Doing a weekly live show for 2 hours, I don't do as much preparation as I would like to. I did next to no prep work for this show. I don't know if maybe that's apparent or it's not. But the day-to-day research and prep, it kind of depends. If I'm doing, like when I did the last week or a week ago, I did like a whole hour on the raid at the North Korean embassy in Madrid. That's going to take a little bit more, research, a little prep work, for something like that. I had about 2 pages of notes that I was sort of going off of for that kind of thing. But, a lot of time, it doesn't take all that much, in terms of prep for a show. You get more and more comfortable with it. It's always good to have, if you're interviewing someone, it's always good to have some, questions, have your notes. It's good, you want to be able to reference dates or parts of a book if they're a writer or whatever. But, a lot of it is really just, you kind of have to feel it out, and you have to let the guest kind of dictate to an extent where you're going, because you can't predict how a live conversation is going to happen. But day-to-day research, it kind of varies. I try to at least, at the moment I'm doing some more Epstein-related research. I know that that's not news to anybody, but I try to at least, I'm trying to get through James Patterson's book, which is pretty awful, although there is some interesting information and nuggets in there. So, for something like that, I try at least, every day, jot down notes, read a couple chapters, what have you. It kind of depends. But I would say, usually speaking, Monday is always a big research day for me, either for the show or for my other stuff. I have a little bit of time during that day to really kind of focus on that kind of stuff. But yeah, a lot of day-to-day research is, it kind of depends. It goes back and forth. If I'm working on something, I'm going to spend a lot more time on it. A lot of, again, doing the weekly radio show, talking for 2 hours, getting guests, working on other projects too. I'm working on, some behind-the-scenes things. It kind of limits what you can do with, the day-to-day research and prep stuff. And a lot of time, it's really about, relaxing. I know that might sound counterintuitive, but
here's the thing about that, just real quick. And here I am jumping in because you said I'm a welcome voice. So
yes, please, Chuck, save me.
But here's the thing, man. I think that there's sort of an organic process that takes place that people like you and me take for granted. I try to do 5 shows a week, yes. Right? And it's a crazy thing, but really it's my daily routine. What do you pay attention to, and what activities do you participate in that meld together? And I think the same is true for you. It's just that, you have a week to collect it up, right? So maybe something really cool happens on Wednesday, but by the time Tuesday next comes back around, you've experienced a lot of other things. You've been, like you said, reading a a book or watching a TV series or catching a documentary or a breaking news event has come around. Something has happened. And it's all about what you're kind of generally plugged into on a daily basis as a host, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there are just those key, topics that I'm always kind of checking up on. Like I always, Epstein is a big one. That's an obvious one. But to a lesser, stuff in Sudan, Africa, I always try to kind of focus on like the somewhat underreported geopolitical stories. And yeah, it just kind of becomes, like in a day-to-day research thing. Yeah, I think you're right, Chuck. It is almost just kind of like second nature. It's just you're aware of it. You're actively searching for that material all the time. And of course, there's some trusted sites and stuff. Intel News is always, I always check that every day for updates. Moon of Alabama. I was complaining about them, but the Long War Journal is, of course, great if you want to know, what the neocons are up to, and it is filled with good reporting. So yeah, there's always those sort of things, and always kind of trying to think of interesting stories and ideas. But yeah, you're right. I think it changes. What I think I'm going to talk about, Wednesday afternoon when some story breaks is not necessarily what I'm going to talk about, a week from then. Or sometimes, like a Monday, story, is not what I'm actually going to talk about today. So yeah, I hope that.
Last thing before I shut off my mic is that you still have JG on hold, by the way, just in case you wanted to go back to him. But no, I think that's an important thing to note. And I'm trying to assist Curtis's question here by adding, right? Because he's not here to add to it and make a comment. So I'm trying to do it on his behalf.
Yes.
So there you go. I'm going to shut up now and let you continue. But you just let me know if you want me to drop JG back in and try to watch for those messages. All right.
Yes, I will. I think I did actually see that JG is still on the call. Maybe we'll bring him back in a second. Or actually, maybe why don't we bring JG on the call right now, because Curtis has another interesting question related to kind of Austrian economics. And I know that JG might have some interesting perspectives on that. So why don't we bring JG on the call and Curtis is and he's mentioned this before to me, that he's Austrian economics, libertarian perspective. That's the perspective he comes from. And I've been very open about that I don't really subscribe to that anymore, but of course I did. But Curtis has an interesting question, and I'll just say too, that's never Curtis and I are I consider good friends, online friends, and our differences of opinion there have never it's never mattered to either of us. And I actually think Curtis is one of the few real libertarians out there that actually listen to my show and enjoy it, and I think they incorporate a wide variety of political perspectives and stuff. But Curtis asked the question, and I don't really know. I don't know enough to really kind of answer, but maybe JG might have some thoughts. Curtis asks, what are your thoughts on why the student loan debt cannot be allowed to be covered by bankruptcy laws? I ask because I seem to only hear two options: the status quo and, quote, free college education and student debt forgiveness. I don't know what the sort of Austrian, perspective on this is. JG, any thoughts on that? I mean, I guess student loan probably could be covered by bankruptcy laws. I mean, me personally, I think that it should just. Part of me thinks that it should be a debt forgiveness, if only because it's such an economic bubble. I was given a loan when I clearly I didn't live on my own. I owned absolutely nothing, and these banks, giving me the loan, they knew that. and they knew that I would probably, that I wasn't going to be able to start paying this off, in the 4 years after college. So in that sense, I mean, it seems reckless that, banks and these lending institutions are giving people money, especially when you're talking about really large sums where, no one is no kid out of college is going to be able to pay off $100,000, in loans. So, I suppose there could be like a bankruptcy, aspect to that. JG, any thoughts on that?
I'm actually, that one has me stumped too. I've often wondered why we don't just have a debt jubilee when it comes to, the student loan debt, because that seems to be the easiest solution at this point.
Yeah, and I don't know that I would actually be interested, Curtis, if maybe you could email me a little bit more info on this. I'd be interested in. I'm not surprised that there is a libertarian argument about bankruptcy as like a viable option. Like that seems kind of in their wheelhouse when it comes to student loan. I think though the my argument against that, and I don't quite know if I know enough about it, is like it just still seems that ultimately the onus is on these shady banks and companies giving kids the money. Because they know, I mean, it's worse than the housing crisis. I mean, I don't have any, like when I was given the loan, it's not like I had collateral. It's not like I owned anything. At least like in 2008 with the housing bubble, I mean, these people own cars. They might have savings. I mean, I didn't have anything. So they were just giving money to dumb kids, 17, 18 years old, knowing full well that it's not going to happen. So that's, I don't know. And then very quickly, because I think we're probably getting up towards the very end of the show, Curtis also asks, and I'll love to get your take on this too, JG, is Code Pink legit? And he talks about, Scott Horton talking about, Medea Benjamin in the past. And I don't know. Me personally, I don't think Medea Benjamin is legit. I don't quite know about Code Pink. JG, quickly, we got like 2 minutes. Any thoughts on that?
I always thought Code Pink were pretty principled about stuff. I don't know what happened during the Obama years, if they sort of gave up on the anti-war stuff, but that wasn't my impression.
Yeah, I think that they raise good points and stuff. I think Medea Benjamin is a little, I don't know, there's something about me that rubs me the wrong way. I mentioned before, her locking arms with Cassandra Fairbanks, just on principle, I think that's irresponsible at best, naive. I do think, to put on my tinfoil hat, I think Code Pink is used a lot of the time as the, this is the standard issue example of the anti-war movement. How Medea Benjamin gets access to every, Senate hearing only to disrupt it is sort of beyond me. I mean, maybe there's no law barring her from entering these places, but it's funny to me that she's always there, just so that it can be kind of this like joke of a soundbite, on Fox or whatever, on Twitter. And that to me is a little weird. And I do think though that there's more to Code Pink than just that, the kind of sensational aspect to it. But I think we are probably out of time. JG, I'm glad you jumped back on at the end. You can probably hear my voice is fading a little bit. Once again, I want to thank everybody who called in this week. I would love to have another call-in show. It was wonderful getting to communicate and talk with all of the guests. Big thanks to Jon Gold and JG Michael, of course, friends of the show, guests of the show who also called in. But a big thanks to Tor and Kai as well. Excellent. I hope I'm not missing anybody. Curtis, thanks for the email. Thank you, Chuck, as well. for manning the phone lines. Once again, I am Pierce Redmond. If you enjoy this show, you can find more by going to porkinspolicyreview.com, and you can support me on Patreon, which is patreon.com/Pierce Redmond. Thank you all so much for listening, and until then, I'll be talking to you very soon.
Yeah.